In this video, we're going to show you how to create a skirt with a fair bit of flare. So not as much as a full circle skirt and not as little as an A-line skirt. So we're going to build on the block, the skirt block from UTS, and we're going to be adding 50 centimeters in length to the hem. So starting with using the slash and spread technique, and then following, we'll recreate the same pattern using the pivoting technique. So I've lined up the center front on the edge of the paper, and I'm going to place a weight on it and trace around, all the way around. Don't forget the notches and the drill hole for the dart. I'm also marking this point down here. If you've already watched the Making an A-line video, there'll be some repetition because we'll start by using the same technique that we used to close the dart to add flare. We're going to build on that by adding further flare to the center front and the side seams of both of these pieces. So I've traced around the block and I've marked the end of the dart here. So that needs to be drawn in. And I've got the point at which we'll cut it open from the hem down there. So I need to extend that line up in order to cut it. So from there I have 13.4. I think my marking of that point was a little bit off. Okay, and we're going to repeat the same process for the end of the dart and for the center back over here. Marking that point. So this point here on the hem is in a straight line with the end of the dart. So that line needs to be drawn, so I mark the end of the dart in, and then we need to, like we've connected that line to the hem down there, we're going to do the same thing on the back. So measuring across, we have 12.6, 12.6, and 12.6. Okay, before I cut them up, I'm going to mark the center front, the side seam, and the center back. If you're not sure which is the back and the front after you've traced them off, remember that your center front is always on that straight line and the center back has a slight curve, and the double notches can always remind you that that is the back. Now we're ready to cut out these pieces and start spreading them and adding fullness. Like in the video where we created the A-line skirt, when we cut them out, we're eliminating the value of this dart here on the front and the back. So this dart is now gone, and then we keep cutting way down to here. Okay, so we've got our pieces cut out. Now we need to make sure we have enough paper to place them down and to create the extra volume that we want. I'm going to start with the center back. So the first step is to pivot these to close the dart like this. So we've eliminated that dart value, and now we're closing it to create that spread that's coming in down the bottom there. And I'm going to place some tape on our pieces so they don't move around. Okay, so we've got that additional volume coming in down here. Now we want to give the skirt even more spread, so we're going to add some to the centre back and then adding some to the side seam. So I'm going to add 5 centimetres to the side. Like that. And then that line will be blended up to this hip notch here. So rather than, so making sure that if you add more flare, if you can see I'm adding more flare here, if I do that, then you'll start creating a bump on this side seam. So if you want to eliminate that, if that's part of the style, that's fine, and then you make sure that that's a smooth curve. But if you don't want that and you want a smooth line up to the waist, then you need to make sure that your line has no bump at this junction. So I've drawn that extension. Now I need to measure from here to here. Oh, sorry, from here to the original end of the block, 47, so that when I swing this out, I'm getting the right hem length, and I'm not making it longer or shorter accidentally at that point. Now I'm going to put in the same amount at the centre back. Actually no, I'm going to half that amount, because at this centre back we're going to have half of it coming to the centre back, the left and the right. So rather than adding 5, I'm adding 2.5. And then extending that up to the same point. And then checking the measurement from the notch, that's 44.6, and then translating that across like that. Now we use the French curve for this central section. And then connecting these 2 points with the flatter section. Okay, now we're ready to do the front. So we've cut out the front and I've placed it on, I've created a fold here so that I can create both sides of the pattern in full. The first thing that we're going to do, apart from marking this centre front on, is to measure 2.5 centimetres at the centre front. So from the centre front, 2.5, and then I'm adding 5 centimetres in fullness to the centre front, which is why I've put 2.5 on the fold. That looks a little bit more than 2.5. Oh, there we go, that's better. Okay, 2.5 on the fold, and centre front sitting right on the fold up the top. So once you've got that position, we can pop a little bit of tape on it. Here and here. Now we are closing again like we did in the video on creating the A-line skirt. We're closing that dart, so making sure it's nice and lined up with the waist. And a little bit more tape down here. Now I'm not putting too much tape on so that after you've got the shape and added your seam allowances, you can actually remove these pieces so that they're not flapping around on your pattern down the track. When you're doing this work in your journal, it's good to leave them in there so that you can see the steps that you've taken. So I've added 5 centimetres on the fold here, and I'm adding another 5 centimetres on the side seam. Okay, and from this notch to the hem is 47 centimetres, and so I'm going to swing that out and mark the 47 there on the hem. Now we use French curve to connect these points. At the centre front we'll use a flat section and a flat-ish section over here. Now the patterns that we've created using the slash and spread are both ready to add seam allowances, grain lines and labelling. Before I do that, I'll move on to the next technique and show you how to create this pattern again by using the pivoting technique. So now we're going to use the same technique, a different technique to create the same flared skirt effect. So we are pivoting rather than cutting and tracing. We're going to trace sections of the block and then pivot it shut. So to start with, we're adding our 2.5 centimetres to the centre front. Now I've got my paper on the fold already, so I'm going to mark 2.5 centimetres. Place it in position. So the centre front is bang on the fold at the top and the hem is the 2.5. So I'm going to place a weight, draw this section. So here you'll remember we've got a parallel line from the end of the dart down to the hem, and that's parallel with centre front, and that's the line, the position that we're opening to add some flare to the skirt, the same way that we did in creating the A-line skirt. So now I'm tracing the centre front waist to the first arm of the dart, remove the weight, and then using my finger on the end of the dart, I'm pivoting that dart closed like that. So making sure it's not moving around in any other direction. Place the weight back on, side seam, and I'm finishing the tracing at around this notch because I'm going to add some more flare over there. And now I'm tracing from this point to that point there. Now we're adding 5 centimetres, so I'm using my ruler to mark the 5 centimetre position. And then pivoting from here, actually I'll pivot all the way from the side seam down to the hem like that. So I'm pivoting from this junction up here, down to the hem, and then tracing that whole side seam in. So now we use the edge of our French curve to join this section over here and extend that to the centre front. At this centre front junction, you need to make sure that there's actually a right angle, so I think I've put a little bump in it. We need this small section here on the hem to be at a right angle so that when we open it out, you don't have a section of the hem that's coming up or bumping down like that. Okay, we've got the front, and now we're going to pivot the fullness into the back. Okie dokie. So starting down here, we're going to start by adding 2.5 centimetres to the back. So tracing to here, to the first arm of the dart, and then I'm going to pivot out to this 2.5. Swing back to the original position and extend the line to this mark down here. So remember that we've got this position at the hem, which lines up with the end of the dart up here. Now we are going to pivot the dart shut. So using my finger, make sure everything is out of the way. Using my finger to hold the end of the dart, closing the dart, and then placing a weight on it and tracing this hem section down here. And then pivoting out 5 centimeters to add that extra fullness. Again, using the French curve to finish the hem. And we need our grain line up here. So rather than using the original grain line, I'm going to follow parallel with the new centre back of the skirt. So as the skirt curves in at that top section, it narrows to the position of the grain line, but we need to follow this straight section down here. Okay, now we're ready to add seam allowances. So remember, when we close the dart up here, that means that this notch is actually no longer useful. We get rid of that one. We also note that when we've closed the dart itself has disappeared, which means we not only don't need the notch up here, we also don't need to transfer the drill hole across to our new pattern. So I'm leaving that as is. So there we have 2 techniques for creating a flared skirt.